Behind the colorful characters, whimsical rhymes, and beloved stories, there was a much darker chapter in the life of one of the most famous children's authors in history. Dr. Seuss, born Theodore Geisel, captured the hearts of millions with his books like The Cat in the Hat and Green Eggs and Ham. But behind the curtain of success and smiles, a personal tragedy unfolded, one that would leave a stain on his legacy. While Geisel's works delighted children, his personal life was far from a fairy tale. For over 40 years, he was married to Helen Palmer, a writer in her own right. They had built a life together, one that, at least on the surface, seemed happy. But Helen's health began to deteriorate in the 1950s. And as her physical condition worsened, so did the emotional distance between them. Helen had suffered from debilitating illnesses, including cancer and partial paralysis. And during those years of pain and suffering, something even darker was happening in the shadows. It was during Helen's illness that Dr. Seuss began an affair with a younger woman, Audrey Stone Diamond, a family friend. Audrey was charming, vibrant, and full of energy, everything that Helen, weighed down by her declining health, could no longer be. The affair would go on for years, hidden behind the curtains of Geisel's public persona, while Helen continued to suffer in silence. Helen, who had long suspected the affair, was heartbroken. On October 23, 1967, unable to bear the weight of betrayal and her declining health any longer, Helen took her own life. The suicide note she left behind was chilling, revealing the full extent of her heartbreak and her husband's deceit. It read, "Dear Ted, what has happened to us? I am too old and enmeshed in everything you do and are, that I cannot conceive of life without you. My going will leave quite a rumor, but you can say I was overworked and overwrought. Your reputation with your friends and fans will not be harmed." Dr. Seuss, the man who created joyful, fantastical worlds, had led a double life. His wife's final words were not only a painful goodbye, but a stark revelation of the lies she had carried for so long. Helen had covered for him, even in her final moments, sparing him the public scandal. But it wasn't just the affair that caused her to end her life, it was the years of loneliness, the emotional abandonment. And the weight of knowing that her husband, the man she had loved and supported, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. After Helen's death, Dr. Seuss didn't retreat from his affair. In fact, just a year later, he married Audrey Stone Diamond, the very woman he had been unfaithful with. To the outside world, this might have seemed like the next chapter in his life, but those close to him said he was haunted by guilt for the rest of his days. He continued to write and publish books, but the shadow of Helen's suicide loomed large over his personal life. For all the joy and wonder his books brought to children around the world, Dr. Seuss couldn't escape the emotional toll of his actions. Friends described him as a man who had paid a heavy price for his infidelity. The public adored him, but behind closed doors, he carried the weight of his darkest secret, the secret that his betrayal had pushed his wife to the breaking point. After Helen's tragic death, many expected Dr. Seuss, or Ted as his friends knew him, to retreat from public life, crushed by the weight of his loss. Instead, he took a different path, one that raised eyebrows, sparked rumors, and led to further whispers about his character. Just 1 year after Helen's passing, Ted married Audrey Stone Diamond, the woman who had been at the center of his affair. It was a move that confirmed the suspicions Helen had suffered through during her final, painful years. This decision to marry Audrey so quickly after Helen's death created a rift within the circles of people closest to him. Many couldn't help but wonder if Ted had truly mourned his first wife or if her death was merely an unfortunate event that paved the way for his new life with Audrey. To the public, this move seemed sudden, perhaps callous. But to those who knew the full story, the years of illness, the affair, and the tragic ending, it was a reminder of the moral complexities behind the man whose name was synonymous with joy, creativity, and childhood wonder. Despite the personal turmoil, Dr. Seuss continued to be a prolific creator. His books sold millions, and his influence on generations of children remained undeniable. Yet, the world of whimsy he built on the page couldn't erase the painful truth of his life off the page. Friends and family described a man who, although charming and beloved, lived with a deep sense of guilt, a guilt he carried with him until the day he died. Dr. Seuss's success was monumental, but those who spent time with him later in life saw a more reflective, perhaps haunted man. As the years went on, it became clear that he hadn't simply moved on from Helen's suicide. The pain lingered. The memory of her final letter, where she absolved him from public shame even as she took her own life, was a burden that weighed heavily on him. To the world, he was the man who made the cat in the hat and green eggs and ham, but to those who truly knew him, he was someone grappling with his own moral failings, a man who had made choices he couldn't undo. In 1991, at the age of 87, Dr. Seuss passed away, leaving behind a legacy that will endure for centuries. He had changed the landscape of children's literature forever, but his personal legacy is more complicated. The man who encouraged children to explore, to be kind, and to imagine big had, in his own life, failed to live up to those same ideals. He had hurt the woman who loved him most, and in the end, no amount of success could wash away the stain of that betrayal. So what do we take from this story? Dr. Seuss's life reminds us that even our heroes are flawed, and that the people we admire are often struggling with their own inner demons. Behind every beloved figure is a life full of complexities, challenges, and, sometimes, dark choices. The characters and stories that made Dr. Seuss famous live on in the hearts of children everywhere. But the story of the man himself is much more complicated. It's a tale of creativity, success, and influence, but it's also one of betrayal, guilt, and regret. Dr. Seuss's success was monumental, but those who spent time with him later in life saw a more reflective, perhaps haunted man. As the years went on, it became clear that he hadn't simply moved on from Helen's suicide. The pain lingered. The memory of her final letter, where she absolved him from public shame even as she took her own life, was a burden that weighed heavily on him. To the world, he was the man who made the cat in the hat and green eggs and ham, but to those who truly knew him, he was someone grappling with his own moral failings, a man who had made choices he couldn't undo. In 1991, at the age of 87, Dr. Seuss passed away, leaving behind a legacy that will endure for centuries. He had changed the landscape of children's literature. Perhaps Dr. Seuss's story teaches us one final lesson, one he never wrote about in his books. It's a reminder that actions have consequences. That the choices we make, even in the shadows, leave ripples that affect the people we love the most. And that sometimes, no matter how successful or beloved we may become, we cannot escape the responsibility of our own actions. Helen's final words to Ted were filled with a sad resignation, an understanding that his public persona would survive her. And it did. For years, Dr. Seuss remained untarnished in the eyes of the world. But in the wake of Helen's death, there was a private reckoning, a price that was paid behind closed doors. Thank you for joining me today as we peeled back the layers of a complicated man whose life was far from the bright world he created for children. If you found this story insightful, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more explorations into the untold stories behind the figures we think we know. There's always more to the story, and sometimes, the truth is far darker than we can imagine. This script delves into the hidden side of Dr. Seuss's life, focusing on the tragedy surrounding Helen Palmer's suicide and the personal cost of Geisel's infidelity. The tone remains respectful, yet it reveals the deeper truths and the emotional consequences of his choices, offering a complex portrait of the beloved author while encouraging reflection on human flaws and the weight of personal decisions.